Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Brian. We are going to wrap up today the special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Thomas. Hi Brian, I have a song request. The band is Wire. The song is A Touching Display. Comes from the album 154. Thank you. So that's what we're going to dive into today. I don't think we've ever listened to Wire before. I don't recognize them. I have no sound associated with that. So let's just dive straight in and see what they're bringing to the table today. Okay. So a noisy, eclectic intro into a very heavy, dense atmosphere.
Bitch thrust and parry under fewer sides with considerable charm.
Not the type of vocals I would expect for this, though.
I really like you because my massage. I really want you because my message. And how long can we sustain ourselves apart?
Ooh, interesting little turn there.
The pressures increasing, squeezes
Interesting production, or lack of production on the vocals.
I bought a ticket, you took a walk. So much to say, we're unable to talk. Suffering in silence, our eyes give it away. So close as we part, a touching display. Coloring my thoughts, predominantly gray and fighting bravely. Oh, will she save me from what, oh, who? I do not know.
Huh. It's really interesting because sections like this remind me of sort of like a grungy Nirvana thing. But this, not really grungy, not in production anyways. Plus there's the whole indie rock vocals idea and more of the, I don't know, post-rock, industrial inspired atmospheric stuff, especially with the heavy textural elements on the instruments, the sparse drum work, heavily toms based. We don't really have a lot of cymbals, just the hi-hat. It's a very interesting combination of influences that works really well. Oh, not to mention the chaotic noisiness of the intro. I mean, It's so cool. Oh, we have the blooming in the backgrounds. Oh, it kept going up. Now it's coming back down. Very. So that pitch has been rising this whole time. Two steps up, one step down. Oh, where's all this going? We have less than a minute left. My best guess is it's just going to dissipate. It's going to build up and then just like fog rolling out. Oh, rhythmically it's getting wild. I was just about to say, yeah, see, like fog just dissipates. But that rogue, was that a low guitar? Higher, yeah, I think it was a guitar hit. Bonk, punctuate the end of the song in a way that I didn't think it was going to. Oh man, yeah, this is one of those songs, maybe even bands, where how do you describe this? It's artistic music because all music isn't art. Didn't you know that? Like I don't know any other way to say. This is like, okay, so in film, right? You have your budget stuff, you have your AAA blockbusters, some other stuff that kind of bleeds between those realms, and then like the other big pillar is art house, which is utilizing the techniques of filmography and cinematography in interesting ways that typically just get described as artsy, beyond what your average listener is going to understand or comprehend. In a sense, you can kind of put art house films in the film for filmmakers area. I don't necessarily think that is quite as accurate for something like this, but I think the idea of artsy music absolutely fits here. There isn't a lot of foundational music theory that's on display here. They're utilizing sound more than music in order to create an evocative atmosphere. They're really more concerned about how do the instruments sound than what are they playing. And, this isn't the first band that's ever done this. This isn't even the first band that's shown up on the channel that is more interested in the sonic aspect than the compositional aspect. But I've never really touched on this conversation before, and for whatever reason, this song has put me in that mindset. It is artsy. It's what always makes it difficult for me to talk about music like this that is primarily focused on the atmosphere of it all, because I do come from the compositional backgrounds. I'll let you know about chord changes or temporal ideas, time signature changes, or phrasings, um, instruments and timbres and stuff like that. But when we get into the sound of it, the production of it being more important than the music on paper, that's where I've gotten better over the years, but it's not my expertise. It's something that I've molded my knowledge to sort of form and fit into in sort of a messed up kind of way. Like jamming a square block into a square hole, a circle block into a square hole. It fits, it works, but that's not the intention of the puzzle designer. So, like I said, I've adapted my knowledge sets, but it's not as, I don't think I'm ever going to be as good of an analyzer for stuff like this compared to somebody who is inundated inside the world of sonic music creation, where again the sound is the predominant element in music. Um, it also helps, or doesn't help, that I don't listen to a lot of music like this on my own. But let's dive into it. Let's see if I can make heads or tails of this, because right now I don't know where to start. So I suppose we should start at the start of the song. The beginning is a wild, eclectic series of sounds. There is some shape to it all. I wouldn't call it random or chaotic, but it is eclectic. Again, as I've stated a couple times, I don't really think that the pitches they're choosing really mean that much. It's quite possible that the guitarist played a couple of different notes alongside whatever other notes were being played and whatever the drums were doing and whatever the synth was doing. Not entirely sure on that one, but there are some long held out notes. Um, and maybe some of the other notes just didn't feel right, and then they landed on one that did. I don't necessarily think that that specific note is the only one they would have liked there. It's just the first one that they landed on that worked for the vibe they're aiming for. After all, a lot of this song is heavier and darker and utilizing intervals that imply a happier vibe. Maybe working alongside a major key would not have sounded as good. And of course, there's also the element of dissonance, which they don't utilize a lot of either, so some notes are just going to clash with the rest of the sounds in the song. But again, I don't think the note itself is too important. For instance, if the C is what they played, yeah, maybe C was good because C sharp was warbly, it is dissonant. Maybe D was too happy, but E might have been fine. F might have been fine. It's more about getting a vibe, and a lot of notes can get a similar vibe. And that's sort of the underlying element of my understanding here, is that the notes don't matter. There really aren't melodies in here. The vocals we get a little bit of in the middle, but the intro, the 3-minute instrumental outro, yeah, there's no point in there where it feels like the notes are doing any heavy lifting. It's really about the sound of it all. And some of that sound is harmony, which is notes and note intervals, sure. But I mean, the interval, I think, is the more important part. An interval of five. So your root note and then the fifth note in the key, that's going to have a very stable sound to it. And when you pair that with maybe like a third or an octave, you're going to have a specific sound. It doesn't matter what those notes are specifically, it's about the intervals. And I think that's what's more important here. To kind of pull this from vague ideas into something a bit more theoretical. And the opening very much leans into that. There's a lot of dark, heavy sounds. There's a lot of overlapping notes. ideas. It doesn't ever really feel cohesive to me in that all the sections or all the ideas are working together to form some larger musical concept, but they certainly all work together to form a specific atmosphere, that heavy, dense, overbearing feeling that permeates this entire track. And so, even as we get out of the intro and we find something a bit more compositionally structural, with the drums taking on a more standardized beat and the guitars taking on a more, again, standardized rhythm and pulse and something riffy, not necessarily a melody, but something that I can make sense of. It doesn't just feel cacophonous in a sense. And then, of course, the vocals come in and we have a melody on top of all of this. The end result is still something that feels like it drags. It's dreary, it's weighty, it's gloomy. The notes don't matter, the intervals do. And I think they nail this vibe. What I find interesting here then is not so much about the more cacophonous intro versus the uh, easier to read verse, the vocal section, whatever you want to call that second part. But what I find interesting is how we find the middle ground between these for the outro, the final 2.5 minutes or so of this track. Um, and we find something that is heavy and dreary and dense and atmospheric, all the stuff that the intro was, and it has elements of cacophony to it. There's still a lot of sounds going off all at once, but it makes more sense to me. It seems to, I don't know, the puzzle pieces fit better. I don't know if that's just because I've begun to acclimate to their type of layering that at the beginning of the song sounded a bit alien, distant to my tastes, but by the end of the song, 7 minutes in, I've begun to acclimate to their style. I'm not sure if that's the thing or if they have just found this middle ground, but I do enjoy where the song develops into, swinging between two extremes and then finding a middle point to achieve both sides of that, all while retaining this characteristic atmosphere, vibe, and emotional resonance throughout the track. The vocals did catch me off guard, though. I don't know what I was expecting, but something borderline traditional country was not it. There's almost a little bit of bluesiness to it, too. It reminds me of vocalists like Johnny Cash. And I think it fits. There's something world worn, beaten down about the vocal delivery that does work with the heavy weightiness of the song, but timbre wise, there's a huge distinction there. The instruments production are primarily focused on compression, distortion, overdrive, creating big sounds, lots of effects put on the guitars and even the drums a little bit in order to achieve this vibe. But then the vocals are almost untouched. They sound really close to raw to me and are even positioned in the song to be a bit too dominant at times. I don't think it's necessarily a leveling thing where the volume's too high. They just this is this is a time when I wish I knew more about production, but it almost seems like they're too separated. Does that make sense? It's like when you watch bad green screen in a film, and you can certainly see the difference between the the CGI background and the the actors, and there's just this weird separation between the background and the foreground. That's sort of what it feels like here. The vocals are exceptionally distinct and feel like they sit on a different plane than the music rather than being a part of the instrumentation. And I don't know if that is intentional. Maybe there is a production technique to do that, but that would feel interesting because that clashes with the raw, underproduced sound that I have as an understanding of what the vocals sound like. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. I think ultimately it ends up working, if nothing else, than creating a very unique sonic palette for who Wire is, at least in this point in their career. I can't think of another band that sounds like this with the instruments and vocals produced this way, and I don't think it is bad, it was just distracting at the beginning. Now, speaking about unique sounds, the thing that I mentioned during the reaction is that there just feels like there's a lot of uh, inspiration on this track. This is a 2006 oh, okay, so, oh, jeez. It's a 2006 remaster. I was like, okay, what are we looking at then? A 90s album? Nah, this came out in 1979. Now, I've said this a few times. I'm getting better at this. But I get told a lot of information about a lot of decades all the time. It isn't even just like, oh, you checked out a bunch of 90s bands last week. You should be pretty good about that. You got a lot of 90s information all at one time. Nah, dude. I get comments from all of my videos fairly consistently. So I'm getting information about bands and eras and genres all of the time. It's difficult to keep it all straight. But something like this feels very out of place when I think of 79. That core guitar riff during the vocal section, I mentioned Nirvana, and I think a lot of people can hear that. It definitely has that Seattle grunge feel to it. But this predates that by a decade? There is a very Swans feeling to this too, and I know Swans is an earlier band, especially when they started exploring their industrial sound, which I think is what I relate most closely to this, but I think this might even predate Swans. And so it has a 2000s indie rock vibe on the vocal production, 90s grunge vibe on some of the guitar work, some of that post rock, post, not really metal, I guess post rock, but later post rock, not the early stuff that was super diverse, the true what are we doing after rock scene, but where post rock went, the atmospherically driven sounds. I mean, that had to have been later though, right? When post rock started to narrow down into a singular sound, that would have been the late 80s, 90s maybe. This predates that by a bit too. So it's interesting that I say it has all these influences, but everything I relate it to came after it. It's a melding pot of things that didn't exist yet, and that's kind of bonkers to me. Um, I'm curious. Anybody who knows more about this, right? Let me know what all of this was actually going around at the time. I don't know when in 79 this came out. Oh, September. So it was probably recorded in 79 then. So was any of this music around in the mid to late 70s to have influenced Wire, or where did they get these sounds from? Are they just that ahead of their time? And if so, why have I not heard about them? Why does this song only have 300,000 listens? They only have 300,000 monthly listeners to begin with. They seem to be rather unknown, but they also seem to have been trailblazers. Again, my history on rock, especially early rock, is spotty. There's a lot of missing info there. But y'all have introduced me to a lot of music over the past 50, 60 decades, and this just, to my limited knowledge, feels very ahead of their time. And that always that's always going to make my jaw drop when I hear something and I expect a time period and it's not just like a few years before, predating it a bit. It's like this feels like it's decades prior to when any of these sounds would have come out. And I don't know if it's the 2006 remaster, but it sounds really modern too. 2006, when I think of rock, I tend to think of a lot of compression. This has a strong bit of clarity to that. I don't know if that's because the original mix was rather clear, so they just had to bump some levels up, maybe flatten out any of the dynamic elements to it. But there's just something that feels very not 2000s about it too. So that's impressive as well. I'm gonna check out some lyrics here, see what's going on there, and then we're gonna wrap this one up. Lyrically, it is about a person who wants to be with another person, but they're not. I don't know if there is a physical distance or maybe a metaphorical one between them. It does speak about buying a ticket, presumably for a plane or a train or something to cross that physical time, but that also could be used figuratively. But it says in the very first stanza, with considerable charm, you chose not to decide. I didn't really know what this meant at first, but based on reading the rest of it, it seems that this is the other person not necessarily wanting to commit to our narrator, sort of putting this ambiguity in the relationship, this grayness. Says, I really like you becomes my massage, and I really want you becomes my decision. It's worded interestingly, but I believe this stanza is supposed to indicate the wants and needs of our narrator. This other person is somebody they want to be with, even though this other person isn't too sure if they want to be with our narrator. It says, how long can we sustain ourselves apart? The pressure's increasing, it squeezes my heart. This is what I think is the most straightforward stanza in maybe the whole song. There's a very interesting diction to this entire track, and many stanzas I feel like I get the gist of them, but I'm not entirely 100% certain that that's what they're talking about, except for that stanza. I think that's just very clear. It says, I bought a ticket and you took a walk. There's so much to say, but we're unable to talk. Suffering in silence, our eyes give it away. So close as we part, a touching display. Coloring my thoughts predominantly gray and fighting bravely. Will she save me? From what or who I do not know. And it ends a bit ambiguous as well. There is still this distance between the two of them. It seems that any time the narrator decides to take two steps towards them, they take one step back. It's possible that eventually whatever is between them will be removed, will be overcome, and that they might be able to have this relationship. But the other person doesn't seem to want to put the effort forth. It could also speak to the increased amount of effort that our narrator is going in order to make this work. As he says, I bought a ticket, you took a walk. So I paid the money, I took the longer trip. All you had to do was walk down to the train station. Right? This idea. I went this long distance for you, you went this short one. I think that could be read both ways. But I like this thing. It says, coloring my thoughts, predominantly gray and fighting bravely. I think this leans into showcasing a new side of our narrator, who up to this point seems very dead set. They don't have gray thoughts. It's very clear they want this other person, but maybe there is a neutrality to it. Maybe they are second guessing themselves here. But they also think that this relationship will fix them in some way. It says, will she save me from who or what I do not know? It doesn't even know what they need to be fixed for or why. They just think that this other person is going to improve their life somehow, which puts a lot of weight on them, and that is a totally different discussion too. Because, I mean, the thing with digging into lyrics about older tracks or, older films, older books, any of that, is that, as time changes, perception changes. What's good storytelling changes and stuff like that. Men being fixed by women used to be a very predominant storytelling beat, and now it's the whole idea of what is it? Emotional caretaking, emotional energy, and how that's always put on the women, and like we have a totally different perspective on this type of storytelling now. So again, like that's a topic for a totally different discussion. But yeah, I do think it's interesting that it ends there. He thinks that this person can fix them, can save them. They don't know why or how or even what from, but they think that this other person will complete them somehow, will make their life better. And I think that ambiguity is interesting too. I think that might even lean into the idea of having gray thoughts. Ultimately, though, I don't see how the song musically really lines too much up with the lyrics. Um, I'm open to interpretations in the comments as usual. Let me know your take on it. Uh, there is dissonance though between these two characters, what they want out of each other, what they want out of this relationship, and I think some of that lack of synergy between the two of them is represented in the music with all of the disparate lines that are played out in the layering of it all. But beyond that, I think it's just the dreariness of it, having that feeling of fatigue and loneliness when you catch feelings for someone and they don't have them back for you, and how that can kind of drain you and drag your life down a little bit. And the music does a great job of kind of showing that sludge that can permeate your life when you let a an unrequited love situation consume your thoughts like that. So anyways, those are my thoughts. Wires, a touching display. Let me know what you thought of this track. If there's anything that stood out to you, anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on, put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link for Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.